A respected federal judge, Miriam Caldwell, faced a shocking injustice when Police Chief Kathleen Rowe abused her power and stripped Miriam of her dignity in public, despite Miriam's position and reputation. Rowe's relentless and unjust actions sent shockwaves through Rockford, stirring outrage and questioning the city's very values. But Miriam's fearless stand sparked a movement, leading to a dramatic showdown that would turn everything upside down. Just wait until you discover how this powerful story unfolds and why, this time, justice could not be denied. In Rockford, Missouri, Miriam Caldwell's rise to the federal bench had been nothing short of historic. For the residents of her city, Miriam was far more than just a judge. She was a living symbol that change was possible, that tradition could be rewritten, and that the law could serve everyone. Her journey had been marked by tireless dedication, countless late-night study sessions as a young attorney, and an unyielding commitment to justice even when the path was lonely. People spoke of her integrity with pride, and her modest house was adorned with tokens of gratitude from families whose lives she had improved by treating every case with humanity and fairness. Miriam's unfaltering belief in the rule of law had grown from hard experience. She knew what it meant to feel minimized, to be passed over, to have her competence questioned for reasons that had nothing to do with her abilities. Still, she met each setback with resilience, and her compassion deepened every time justice prevailed against difficult odds. When she was finally appointed, neighbors organized celebrations, local media ran profiles of her accomplishments, and schoolchildren came to the courthouse on field trips, eager to shake her hand. Her impact extended even beyond her professional duties, as she held free legal workshops for anyone struggling to navigate the complex world of statutes and regulations. It was late one Wednesday evening when Miriam finished a marathon session in court. The hearing she presided over involved questions of equity and responsibility topics she approached with particular care. The courthouse emptied, lights dimmed, and Miriam allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection before heading to her car. As she drove through downtown, fatigue weighed on her shoulders, but a deep sense of purpose accompanied her every mile. Just as Miriam turned onto Oak Street, a familiar route she'd taken hundreds of times, a sudden flash of red and blue pierced the darkness. A police SUV rolled to a stop directly in her path, its headlights illuminating her license plate. She parked, gathered her bag, and stepped calmly out of the vehicle, already recognizing the unmistakable figure of Chief Kathleen Rowe. Kathleen's presence was imposing, and her reputation for inflexible enforcement meant that few dared to contest her authority. Despite the late hour, the street was not empty. Several residents walked their dogs nearby, a couple waited for a delivery under a neon sign, and others passed by, their curiosity piqued by what appeared to be an unusual police stop. Miriam walked forward, posture poised, and greeted Kathleen with professional courtesy. She produced her judicial identification and emblem that should have immediately settled the encounter. Kathleen's demeanor remained rigid. She glanced at the badge but spoke in a clipped voice, her tone sharp and her questions direct. Miriam explained her route, detailed her schedule, even offered polite conversation about the recent changes in the department. None of it seemed to matter. The chief asked why Miriam was in the neighborhood, suggested protocol had not been followed, and implied that her reasons must be verified. With each word, the distance between them grew, not physical, but symbolic. Miriam recognized the familiar painful signs. Power wielded not as protection, but as control. Within moments, the brief interaction drew a crowd. By now, passers-by whispered to one another, exchanging uncertain glances as the tension escalated. Several quietly took out their phones and began recording, not out of malice but out of fear that something was wrong, fear that the old wounds of injustice might tear open in real time. The atmosphere thickened with unease. The cold October air carried Miriam's voice as she calmly reiterated her credentials and reasons for being present. The weight of institutional history pressed down on her, the knowledge that for some, status could be negated by a single show of force, that mutual respect depended not just on titles, but on genuine acknowledgement of worth. Despite her dignified efforts, Chief Rowe remained unmoved, maintaining a position of authority that denied nuance or empathy. As the exchange continued, Miriam felt an aching sense of isolation. She wasn't merely defending her own rights, she was standing in for every person who had been doubted, every professional whose expertise had been overshadowed by prejudice, every member of her community whose existence was questioned. The crowd's quiet uncertainty carried the weight of shared history. They saw themselves in Miriam's steady posture, and heard echoes of older struggles in the clipped retorts of the chief. After what felt like an eternity, the stop ended. Kathleen returned to her vehicle, the crowd dispersed, and Miriam got behind the wheel with trembling hands. Inside her car, the severity of the incident settled in. She had not been physically harmed, but something profound had been shaken her faith that mutual respect had finally found a foothold in Rockford. As she drove home, reflections of every case she'd presided over collided with real, personal experience. She considered what it meant to enforce justice in a world where authority could sometimes overshadow fairness, where trust could evaporate in a single confrontation. That night, Miriam stood by her living room window, staring out at the city lights. She felt not just anger, a raw, consuming fire, ignited by injustice, but also the exhaustion of a lifetime spent challenging invisible barriers. Her resolve was tested. She wondered what might come next, and whether the community that celebrated her success would stand with her now. The memory of the encounter already spread across conversations, news feeds, and messages, stirring emotions among people who had hoped her appointment might protect them from just such moments. The first chapter of Miriam's ordeal left Rockford shaken, reigniting difficult questions about how far the city and the nation still had to go. The following morning, Rockford awakened not to gentle routines, but to a city divided by a video that now flooded every social network feed. Clips from cell phones, start to finish, caught every strained word and unyielding expression under the pulsing streetlights. For some, it was a jarring glimpse at an old struggle resurfacing in their own neighborhood. For others, it prompted disbelief, prompting endless debates about what had really taken place and why. News outlets rushed to cover the unfolding story, each headline carrying a ripple of speculation and concern. Talk radio shows buzzed as callers passionately weighed in, voicing outrage or demanding patience until all facts emerged. Comment sections on local websites became battlegrounds, as citizens of Rockford tried to make sense of what the police chief's actions meant for the values their town claimed to uphold. Miriam, meanwhile, remained in her modest home. Fatigue lingered, not from physical pain, but from the quiet ache of uncertainty and disappointment. Throughout the day she received messages of support, some private and heartfelt, others carefully worded from colleagues wary of taking sides too early. There were, too, messages filled with uncomfortable questions, and requests for comment from journalists eager for a statement she wasn't yet ready to make. She turned her attention to her recovery, focusing on restoring her calm and dignity. But even silence offered little comfort as the outside world speculated on her motives and response. City officials met behind closed doors, their statements measured and pointedly brief. Few were willing to speak on the record, cautious to avoid inflaming the situation or appearing to take a stand before investigations concluded. The courthouse, usually a place of order, felt the unrest as officers whispered about the case, and even those who admired Miriam's achievements now hesitated, fearing potential backlash to their careers if they showed open support. The sense of community that had surrounded Miriam after her appointment seemed to recede overnight, replaced by a discomfort that dulled familiar smiles and slowed conversations. Meanwhile, Chief Kathleen Rowe took the rare step of addressing the public in a televised interview. Sitting across from a local newscaster, she maintained a tone of steadfast determination. She spoke of procedures and public safety, framing the incident as a misunderstanding distorted by the optics of social media. Her supporters echoed her words online, insisting that the situation was being blown out of proportion. Others, however, watched the interview with growing frustration, searching for any sign of accountability or empathy. As the day faded into evening, the tension persisted. The streets were quiet, but within homes, questions grew louder. Some feared what continued division could mean for the city they loved. Others worried whether speaking aloud on the matter might jeopardize relationships or standing in the community. Miriam spent these hours in contemplation, fully aware that the silence from leaders did not equal neutrality. It was an active choice, as impactful as words or actions. That silence, above all, deepened the wound. Each unanswered question, each official's reluctance to address the reality of what had happened, weighed heavily on those already feeling vulnerable. Miriam understood that respect and understanding could be fragile, easily swept aside by hesitation and fear. The second chapter in her ordeal became less a battle between two individuals and more a test of the city's willingness to confront uncomfortable truths, revealing just how much work remained before trust and justice could be considered secure. As days passed, the uncertainty in Rockford transformed into a cautious but determined movement. Miriam Caldwell watched coverage intensify from her living room, her name now a fixture in headlines and discussions across the city. For the first time in her career, she found herself the subject of the story, rather than its impartial observer. She felt the weight of expectation not only from her community, but from herself. She understood deeply that her next steps would set an example, regardless of the outcome. One afternoon, Miriam made the steadfast decision to file a formal complaint against the police department, refusing to let the incident fade into obscurity. The choice had not come easily. She knew that pursuing justice publicly would require immense resilience, not just for herself, but for all those who looked to her as a symbol of hope. As her attorney carefully prepared the paperwork, word spread quickly through the city. Journalists gathered once again at her home, documenting her unwavering resolve. Supporters left flowers and notes on her doorstep. Critics, too, voiced their opinions, some urging her to move on, others condemning any challenge to established authority. Civil rights organizations soon rallied around Miriam's case. They called for transparency and accountability, organizing peaceful demonstrations in front of City Hall. Marching with signs and chanting for justice, these groups made it clear that her struggle was not hers alone. It represented a larger longing for fairness and respect across Rockford and beyond. In meeting rooms and classrooms, people discussed what true accountability would look like, while children who once visited Miriam in court crafted letters of encouragement, drawing hope from her courage. Despite the show of public support, pressures mounted behind closed doors. The legal process moved slowly, with city officials urging patience and reminding the public that investigations take time. Miriam, meanwhile, found herself receiving messages, some veiled, some direct, warning her of the potential costs. She faced rumors, whispered in corridors and relayed in emails, suggesting that her career was at risk or that her reputation could be tarnished by continued resistance. But for Miriam, it was never about reputation. It was about truth, dignity, and the silent promise she'd always kept to herself, to never turn away from what was right. At last, the federal inquiry into the incident began in earnest. During hearings, each question asked and each document reviewed felt like a small victory, a step toward making her voice heard. News of her testimony drew even more attention. Supporters lined the courthouse steps, and the eyes of the city remained fixed on every development. Inside the courtroom, Miriam spoke firmly, sharing her experience with courage and composure. The process was grueling, but each word she uttered was a reaffirmation of the principles she held dear. By choosing to speak out, she transformed private pain into public purpose, a message, both to herself and to the generations following, that the pursuit of justice was worth every risk it carried, and that silence stood in the way of true change. Through sheer persistence and integrity, Miriam's struggle inspired conversations and resolutions far beyond her own case. Her determination was not only an act of personal courage, but a declaration on behalf of all who hoped for a future where respect and fairness would never again have to be fought for in such public, painful ways. In the early hours of the morning, as autumn leaves drifted across courthouse steps, a hush fell over Rockford. People arrived long before the sun rose, drawn by the promise of resolution. Reporters clustered with notepads and cameras, police officers kept distant watch, and neighbors came together, some clasping hands, others standing with quiet hope in their eyes. All waited for the verdict, well aware that its impact would reach far beyond the courtroom's walls. Inside, the mood was both tense and reflective. Miriam Caldwell sat at the front, her expression calm but her heart beating with anticipation. she saw familiar faces in the crowd, friends who had stood by her since the first days of her appointment, activists who rallied in support, people whose trust in the city's fairness now hung in the balance. Each seat was filled, and yet the silence spoke volumes, an unspoken plea that, for once, justice would be clear and unassailable. As the jury returned, every eye turned toward them. The announcement was made with steady conviction. Chief Kathleen Rowe was found to have violated not only the law, but the foundational values of respect and equality. Within moments the consequences unfolded: her removal from the police department, a prohibition from holding similar offices, and a formal public acknowledgement of the harm done. For witnesses and supporters, the ruling was met with an outpouring of emotion, applause, tears, embraces shared between strangers who, for months, had felt uncertainty and disappointment shadow the familiar streets of their home. After the hearing, Miriam stepped outside into a crowd that gathered not just to witness but to celebrate. Applause swelled as she addressed the city with measured grace. She spoke neither as a victim nor solely as a judge, but as a citizen who believed deeply that communities can and must heal when wrongs are righted. She thanked those who had marched, written letters, testified with her, and kept watch over fairness when others had lost hope. Her words were humble but powerful, a call to continue striving for understanding and accountability together, no matter how distant that goal sometimes seemed. The story, however, did not end with a single verdict. In the weeks that followed, Miriam's case was discussed in schools, in local forums, and in family kitchens. Teachers used it as an example of standing up for what is right, inviting students to reflect on fairness and personal responsibility. City officials met to review police policies, seeking not just to amend old rules but to create new, more just standards. Social organizations expanded their efforts, energized by the notion that even the highest authorities could be held to account with unity and persistence. For Miriam herself, the outcome was both a relief and a challenge. Returning to her post, she found new meaning in every case she heard. Now, when someone entered her courtroom feeling powerless, she could offer not just justice by the letter of the law, but a genuine sense of empathy. Her experience had transformed her role as judge, no longer only interpreting statutes, but also serving as a living reminder that courage and integrity could restore faith in even the most troubled institutions. Rockford began to change, quietly but unmistakably. Rallies turned into regular neighborhood meetings, with citizens and leaders sitting side by side. People checked in on one another more often, spoke out with greater confidence when they saw wrongdoing, and encouraged young people to use their voices as well as their talents. The question of what kind of city they wanted, one ruled by fear or one rebuilt on trust, was now a daily discussion rather than an elusive dream. Long after the headline faded, Miriam Caldwell's story endured. Her perseverance and grace, in the face of adversity, rekindled hope, inspiring residents to believe that, no matter how entrenched a problem might seem, collective will and principled action could lead to change. News of her ordeal and triumph spread to neighboring towns and distant cities, cited by journalists and community leaders alike as proof that justice, though sometimes slow, could indeed prevail. Years later, Miriam continued to serve her city, walking the same paths and exchanging greetings with families who once hesitated in uncertainty. Children approached her with questions about law and fairness, and adults paused to thank her for reminding them what true leadership looked like. Her story became more than a local legend. It was living proof that courage could heal, and that the arc of justice, however challenged, could still bend toward hope and renewal.